crystal chandeliers of Ashford Estate blazed with 1,000 candles, casting dancing shadows across the polished marble floors of the grand ballroom. 250 wolves in their finest attire swirled beneath the vaulted ceiling, their laughter and champagne glasses catching the golden light. The Winter Masquerade Ball was the event of the season, a celebration of old alliances and new ambitions where visiting alphas paraded their power and unmated wolves searched for destiny. No one noticed the small figure in gray servant's dress moving along the eastern wall, head-bowed silver tray balanced on trembling hands. No one ever noticed Lyric Ashford. She had learned to be invisible. It was safer that way. Safer to move like smoke through the rooms of the estate that had once been her home, to keep her eyes down and her footsteps silent, to make herself so small that even the air forgot she was there. The scratchy wool uniform hung loose on her thin frame, the high collar buttoned to her throat despite the warmth of the crowded ballroom. Beneath that collar, hidden from every eye, a silver-lined band pressed against her skin, burning with slow, patient cruelty. Lyric paused at the service entrance, waiting for the orchestra to swell before she moved again. Timing was everything. If she crossed during a quiet moment, someone might see her, might remember she existed, might find a reason to hurt her. The music crescendoed. She stepped forward. The tray held 12 champagne flutes, each one filled to precisely the same level. She had measured them 3 times in the kitchen, hands shaking under Martha's worried gaze. One mistake. That was all it would take. One spill, one chip in the crystal, one moment of clumsiness, and Isolde would find her after the guests left. The coal cellar was cold this time of year. The silver blade was sharp. Mistakes meant punishment. She made none. She moved through the crowd like water finding cracks in stone, her path calculated to avoid the swirling dancers and the clusters of alphas comparing territories and bloodlines. Her bare feet made no sound on the marble. She had been forbidden shoes for formal events. Isolde said it was because she couldn't be trusted not to scuff the floors. The real reason was simpler and crueler. It reminded everyone, including Lyric herself, exactly where she belonged. At the bottom, the dessert table stood against the far wall, draped in white silk and laden with delicacies Lyric would never taste. She only had to make it 30 more feet, set down the tray, return to the kitchen, survive another night. 20 feet. The scent hit her first. It came from nowhere and everywhere, at once cutting through the perfume and wine and wood smoke like a blade through silk. Rain. Night-blooming jasmine. Something wild and electric, like summer storms rolling over wildflower meadows. The scent wrapped around her lungs and squeezed, making her stumble. The champagne flutes clinked together, a soft crystalline warning. Lyric's heart hammered against her ribs. She knew that scent, not from memory, but from dreams. From the whispers of the wolf that lived buried deep inside her, silent, but not dead, waiting beneath 3 years of wolfsbane and terror. Mate, no. Impossible. She was nothing. No one. A broken servant girl with no voice and no future. The moon goddess did not gift soulmates to girls who scrubbed floors and slept in coal dust. But the scent grew stronger. Lyric forced her feet to keep moving, forced her eyes to stay down, forced her breathing to stay quiet, even as her pulse roared in her ears. 10 more feet. Just 10 more feet to the dessert table. She felt him before she saw him. The air in the ballroom shifted the way it does when a storm front moves in, heavy with ozone and promise. Conversations faltered. Dancers slowed. Heads turned toward the grand entrance at the north end of the hall. AlphaKing Blackthorn stood in the doorway. Lyric had never seen him before. The northern realm was 200 miles away, a kingdom of pine forests and granite mountains ruled by a king. The other alphas spoke of in hushed voices. They called him the Winter King. The wolf who had unified the northern territories through a combination of brilliant strategy and ruthless force. The warrior who carried scars from battles Lyric couldn't imagine and commanded loyalty absolute enough to make other alphas nervous. He was supposed to be a legend, a story told over dinner to impress visiting dignitaries. He was supposed to be safely far away. But there he stood, 6 feet 4 inches of coiled power, in a black suit that had been tailored by hands that understood exactly how dangerous the body beneath it was. Dark hair swept back from a face that looked like it had been carved from winter itself, all sharp angles and harder edges. A scar ran along his left cheekbone, pale against tanned skin, the kind of mark that came from claws, not blades. In his eyes, even from across the room, Lyric could see them. Silver. Not gray, not pale blue, but true silver, like moonlight on ice, like the edge of a blade catching firelight. Those eyes swept the ballroom with predatory precision, cataloging threats and exits and weaknesses in the span of a heartbeat. They passed over Isolde, resplendent in crimson silk at the top of the dais, passed over the council elders in their formal robes, passed over the visiting alphas who had straightened their spines and arranged their faces into expressions of careful respect, and locked onto Lyric. The world stopped. Not metaphorically, not poetically. The actual world, the physical reality of marble floors and candlelight and music seemed to pause as if someone had drawn a breath and forgotten to let it out. Lyric stood frozen with her tray of champagne, 20 feet from safety, caught in the full weight of the Winter King's attention. His nostrils flared, just slightly, just enough. He could smell it. The bond. The truth written in pheromones in moonlight, declaring what her voice could not. Mine. The thought wasn't hers. It came from the wolf, from that buried part of her that had stayed silent for 3 years, enduring poison and pain, because survival meant silence. But now the wolf was clawing at her ribs, howling wordlessly, begging to be seen, to be claimed, to be saved. Run, Lyric thought desperately. Run before he realizes what you are. Before Isolde sees him looking at you. Before everything gets worse. But her feet wouldn't move. Her body had betrayed her, rooted to the marble floor by something older and stronger than fear. Theron took a step forward, then another. The crowd parted for him without thought, an instinctive yielding to the presence of an apex predator. His beta, a scarred man with knowing eyes, followed 3 paces behind, hand resting casually on the pommel of a silver blade that was definitely not decorative. Isolde descended from the dais, her smile sharp and perfect, her hand extended in welcome. She wore rubies at her throat and power like a second skin, every inch the legitimate alpha queen of the Greystone pack. Theron walked past her without a glance. The insult rippled through the ballroom like a stone through still water. Several alphas sucked in sharp breaths. One of the council elders actually gasped. You did not ignore Isolde, not in her own territory, not during a formal event. Not if you valued diplomatic relations and peace treaties and all the careful political dances that kept the packs from each other's throats. But Theron Blackthorn was not here for diplomacy. He crossed the ballroom with the single-minded focus of a wolf who had caught a scent and would not be deterred. 20 feet became 15. 15 became 10. Lyric's hands shook so hard the champagne flutes began to rattle against each other, a soft chiming like wind through crystal bells. She should bow, should kneel, should do something to acknowledge the presence of a visiting king. But if she moved, she would drop the tray. If she dropped the tray, the glasses would shatter. If the glasses shattered, Isolde would notice her. And if Isolde noticed her in front of 250 witnesses, in front of the most powerful alpha in 3 territories, there would be consequences that made silver blades and coal cellars seem like mercy. Theron stopped 5 feet away. Up close, he was overwhelming. Not just his size, though. He towered over her, broad-shouldered and built like violence, waiting for an excuse. It was the sheer presence of him, the weight of an alpha in his prime, a wolf who had clawed his way to kingship and held it through will and blood. The air around him practically vibrated with contained power. But it was his eyes that broke her. They weren't cold. She had expected cold. Expected the legendary Winter King to look at her with the same dismissive indifference everyone else did. Expected to be beneath his notice, just another servant, just another piece of invisible furniture. Instead, those silver eyes looked at her like she was the only person in the room. Like she mattered. Like she was something precious and rare and worth protecting. No one had looked at her that way in 3 years. You, Theron said, and his voice was deep, rough-edged, the kind of voice that gave commands and expected them to be obeyed. What's your name? Lyric's throat worked uselessly. The words were there, trapped behind the damage the smoke had done, behind the psychological chains Isolde had wrapped around her ability to speak. She wanted to answer, wanted to give him her name, her real name, not the cruel nicknames they called her in the kitchens and cellars. But nothing came out except a small, broken sound. Theron's expression shifted. The predatory focus softened into something that looked almost like pain, as if her inability to speak hurt him personally. He took another step closer, and the scent of him surrounded her completely. Cedar and snow and something metallic like ozone before a lightning strike. It's all right, he said, quieter now, meant only for her. You don't have to speak. Behind him, the ballroom had fallen silent. Everyone was watching now. The orchestra had trailed off mid-measure. Conversations had died. 250 pairs of eyes fixed on the bizarre tableau of the Winter King, the most feared alpha in 3 territories, standing motionless before a nameless servant girl with a tray of champagne. Isolde's heels clicked sharply on the marble as she strode across the floor, her face a perfect mask of concerned confusion. King Theron, she said, her voice warm honey with razor blades underneath. Forgive me. Is something wrong? Has this girl offended you in some way? Lyric flinched. She knew that tone, knew what came after it. Isolde was setting the stage, giving herself permission to punish, to correct, to demonstrate proper pack discipline in front of a powerful witness. This girl, Isolde continued, moving to stand beside Theron, her smile sharp enough to cut, is simple. Touched in the head since the tragedy that took her family. We keep her on out of charity, you understand. Christian kindness. But if she's bothered you, she hasn't, Theron said, not looking at Isolde. His eyes stayed locked on Lyric's face. Step back. It wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't even a command. It was a statement of fact delivered in a tone that made it clear what would happen if it wasn't obeyed. Isolde's smile froze. For just a moment, her mask slipped, and Lyric saw the rage beneath it, the barely controlled fury of a woman who was being challenged in her own territory. Then Isolde laughed light and airy, as if Theron had made a charming joke. Of course, my king. Forgive me. I forget how overwhelming our Lyric can be to strangers. That vacant stare, the way she shuffles about. Quite unsettling. She reached out as if to take the tray from Lyric's hands, a gesture of helpful efficiency. Her fingers closed around Lyric's wrist and squeezed. The pressure was precise, calculated, perfectly positioned over the cluster of silver scars that marked Lyric's inner wrist like tally marks. Isolde's thumb pressed down on the newest cut, only 3 days old, still tender beneath the paste and bandages. Pain lanced up Lyric's arm, white hot and sharp, and exactly what Isolde intended. A reminder, a warning, a demonstration of who held the power here regardless of what visiting kings thought they saw. Lyric's fingers spasmed. The tray tilted. 12 champagne flutes slid toward the edge in perfect unison, crystals singing a brief, desperate note before they tumbled into open air. Time stretched. Lyric watched the glasses fall in horrible slow motion, each one catching the candlelight as it spun, each one carrying the weight of consequences she couldn't bear. The champagne caught the light like liquid gold drops suspended in air, like amber, like tears, like the last moment before impact. Isolde stepped back, her face already arranging itself into shocked and disapproval. Lyric braced for the crash. It didn't come. Instead, there was a blur of motion, impossibly fast, and then Theron Blackthorne was on his knees in front of her, not kneeling in submission, not bowing in supplication, but down at her level, one hand catching the tray before it hit the ground, the other reaching for the falling glasses with speed that shouldn't have been possible in human form. He caught 11 of them. The 12th shattered against the marble with a sound like breaking stars, and kept breaking. The impact sent shards skittering across the polished floor in 100 different directions, each piece catching the light, each piece sharp enough to cut. One of them, larger than the rest, spun directly toward Lyric's bare feet. She tried to step back, tried to move away from the dangerous arc of broken crystal, but Isolde was behind her now, positioned perfectly, a wall of silk and cruelty that Lyric stumbled into when she tried to retreat. Isolde's hand pressed against Lyric's back. Just for a second, just long enough, just hard enough to push. Lyric fell forward. Her feet tangled in the hem of her too-long servant's dress, the fabric that had been deliberately given to her in the wrong size, the better to make her shuffle and stumble and look exactly as broken as Isolde claimed she was. She threw her hands out to catch herself, instinct overriding training, survival, overriding the lessons that said to accept pain quietly and without resistance. Her left hand came down on the dessert table. The white silk tablecloth, slick and expensive, slid beneath her palm. Her right hand landed on something else. The shattered champagne glass, the largest piece, the one shaped like a blade. It punched through her palm and kept going, driving deep into the soft flesh between the bones of her hands, severing tendons and nerves with surgical precision. Blood welled up immediately, dark and thick, spilling across the white marble in a spreading pool. Lyric's mouth opened. The scream was there, trapped behind damaged vocal cords. And 3 years of training that said screams were punished, that noise brought pain, that silence was the only shield she had. But this time she couldn't stop it. The sound that came out was small and broken and utterly inhuman. More wheeze than scream, more death rattle than cry for help. It was the sound of something that had forgotten how to be heard. It cut through the ballroom like a gunshot. The silence that followed was absolute. 250 wolves stood, frozen glasses halfway to lips. Conversations abandoned mid-word, dance steps suspended in awkward imbalance. They stared at the tableau before them with the horrified fascination of people watching a carriage crash, unable to look away from the disaster unfolding in real time. Lyric knelt in a spreading pool of her own blood hand, impaled on broken crystal champagne, and crimson mixing on white marble, like some horrible parody of a religious painting. Her chest heaved with silent sobs, her body shaking so hard her teeth chattered, her free hand pressed against her mouth as if she could physically hold back the sounds that wanted to escape. Above her, Isolde arranged her face into an expression of dismayed concern. "Oh dear," she said loud enough to carry to every corner of the ballroom. "How terribly clumsy. I did warn you, King Theron. The girl is a menace to herself." She gestured to two guards standing near the service entrance, big men with blank faces who knew their job and did it without question. "Remove her, please. Take her to the coal cellar until she's recovered from this episode. We can't have her disturbing the guests further with her dramatics." The guards started forward. They made it 3 steps before Theron Blackthorne moved. Later, the witnesses would argue about exactly what happened. Some would swear he simply stood up. Others would insist he erupted from his kneeling position like a spring-released all-coiled violence and lethal grace. A few, the ones with the sharpest senses and the oldest bloodlines, would whisper that for just a fraction of a second they saw his eyes flash pure gold, saw his human shape waver, saw the wolf beneath the skin press against the surface hard enough to blur the lines between man and beast. What everyone agreed on was the sound. The growl that came from the Winter King's chest was not human. It was not even partially human. It was the voice of a wolf who had killed rival alphas and brought territories to heel, who had earned his throne through blood and held it through fear, who had not survived to 32 by being merciful or kind or willing to let challenges go unanswered. It was a sound that said, "Mine. Touch her and die." The guards froze mid-step, every instinct in their bodies screaming at them to submit to bare throats, to acknowledge the presence of something so far above them in the hierarchy that resistance wasn't just futile, it was suicide. Theron turned to face Isolde. His expression was perfectly calm, perfectly controlled, perfectly absolutely terrifying in its lack of emotion. "No one," he said, each word dropping into the silence like stones into deep water, "touches her." Isolde's smile never wavered, but something flickered in her eyes. Calculation. Reassessment. The rapid mental arithmetic of a woman who had built her power on reading situations and adjusting her strategy to match. "My king," she said, spreading her hands in a gesture of reasonable confusion. "I understand the sight is distressing, but surely you can see the girl needs medical attention. The coal cellar has clean bandages, a cot. It's where we always—" "I said," Theron interrupted, his voice dropping even lower. "No one touches her." He turned back to Lyric, knelt again in her blood, heedless of what it was doing to his expensive suit. His hands hovered over her for a moment as if he was asking permission, as if this broken servant girl, kneeling in champagne and blood and humiliation, had any right to grant or deny an Alpha King anything. "This is going to hurt," he said quietly. "I'm sorry." Then his fingers closed around the shard of crystal. Lyric tried to brace herself, tried to prepare for the agony of having broken glass pulled from her flesh. But nothing could have prepared her for the combination of pain and relief as the shard came free, for the way her hand immediately tried to curl in on itself, for the fresh surge of blood that followed the glass's removal. Theron dropped the bloody crystal and immediately pressed his own hand over her wound, applying pressure with a gentleness that seemed impossible from someone his size. His palm was warm against her skin, rough with calluses, steady and sure. Blue light sparked between their touching skin. It was small, barely visible in the candlelight. Just a flicker of electric blue, like static electricity, like summer lightning, like something old and powerful recognizing its match. Every wolf in the ballroom saw it. The whispers started immediately, a rustling susurrus that spread through the crowd like wind through autumn leaves. Mate bond, soul mark, moon blessed. The phrases overlapped and tangled together, disbelief mixing with wonder, mixing with the sharp predatory curiosity of wolves who sensed a shift in pack dynamics. Isolde's face went white, then red, then settled into a mask of stone. Theron ignored all of it. He wrapped one arm around Lyric's waist and rose to his feet in a single smooth motion, lifting her with him as if she weighed nothing. Her bloody hand was cradled against his chest, his other arm secure beneath her knees, holding her like something infinitely precious and infinitely fragile. "Kale," he said, not taking his eyes off Lyric's face. "Medical wing, now." His beta materialized at his elbow, already moving, already clearing a path through the frozen crowd, with nothing but the force of his presence and the hand that had moved from sword pommel to actual drawn steel. "King Theron!" Isolde's voice rang out sharp with barely suppressed fury. You cannot simply abscond with a member of my pack without... Theron turned his head, just his head. The rest of his body stayed perfectly still, perfectly focused on the woman in his arms. When he looked at Isolde, his eyes were no longer silver. They were gold, pure, molten, absolutely inhuman gold. She, he said, his voice resonating with the authority of the wolf and the king combined, is my mate. Under crown law, under moon law, under every law that governs our kind, she is mine to protect, mine to defend, mine to claim. He took a step toward the door, then paused. Looked back over his shoulder at the sea of shocked faces, at the council elders, clutching their wine glasses, at the visiting alphas, whose political calculations were being rewritten in real time. If I see another mark on her, Theron said conversationally as if he was discussing the weather, if I smell fear on her, if I discover that anyone in this pack has caused her even a moment of pain, I will dismantle Ashford Estate, stone by stone, and salt the earth where it stood. The silence was deafening. Is that understood? No one answered. No one dared. Theron nodded once as if their silence was agreement enough. Then he carried Lyric out of the ballroom, through the massive oak doors into the marble corridor beyond. The last thing the witnesses saw before the doors swung shut was the way the broken servant girl had turned her face into the Winter King's chest, the way his arms had tightened around her, the way they fit together like two pieces of the same constellation. The winter masquerade ball continued for another hour. The orchestra played, the champagne flowed, the conversations resumed with the careful enthusiasm of people pretending nothing world-shattering had just occurred. But everyone knew the truth. The Winter King had found his mate, and she was the girl. They had all ignored the servant. They had all dismissed the broken thing. They had all stepped over on their way to more important matters. In the coal cellar beneath the kitchen, in the tiny room where Lyric had slept for 3 years, her thin blanket lay folded on the stone floor. The single candle she was allowed sat melted to a nub beside a crude wooden bucket and a bar of harsh soap. She would never sleep there again. Some endings come with fire and fury. Some come with declarations and destiny. This one came with blood on marble and a king on his knees with a mate, unsparked in champagne and crystal, with a girl who had forgotten her own voice finally being seen by someone who mattered. The wolf inside Lyric stirred for the first time in years, testing the boundaries of her cage, tasting freedom on the air like rain and jasmine and the promise of storms yet to come. And in the ballroom, standing alone on the dais in her crimson silk and ruby necklace, Isolde stared at the blood staining her white marble floor and knew that her careful empire had just developed cracks she might not be able to contain. The real question was how long she had before everything shattered completely. The medical wing of Ashford Estate occupied the entire eastern quarter of the second floor, a sprawling network of rooms that had once been designed to handle everything from difficult births to battle wounds. Now it served primarily as a showpiece, a demonstration of Isolde's commitment to pack welfare, gleaming and sterile, and rarely used for anything more serious than seasonal colds and the occasional training injury. Tonight it became a battlefield of a different kind. Theron kicked the door open with enough force to crack the frame. The hinges screamed in protest, but he didn't slow. Didn't pause, didn't acknowledge the startled doctor who jumped up from his desk with a yelp of surprise. "My king, I didn't—" "Glass wound," Theron said, his voice clipped and efficient, the tone of a man who had given orders on actual battlefields and expected them to be followed without question. "Puncture through the palm, multiple lacerations, significant blood loss. She's been poisoned with wolfsbane, long-term exposure by the smell of it, and there are burns on her neck." He laid Lyric on the examination table with a gentleness that contradicted the violence of his entrance. Her blood had soaked through his white shirt, turning it crimson, but he didn't seem to notice her care. His hands lingered on her shoulders for just a moment before he forced himself to step back to give the doctor room to work. Dr. Emmett Graves was 63 years old and had been practicing medicine since before Lyric was born. He had seen compound fractures and silver poisoning and wounds that should have killed wolves who somehow survived anyway. He had stitched up warriors and delivered babies and pulled arrows from flesh with steady hands and steadier nerves. But he had never seen the Winter King look at anyone the way he was looking at the small, shaking girl on his examination table. Like she was made of spun glass and dying stars. Like losing her would break something in him that could never be repaired. "Of course, my king," Emmett said, already moving, already pulling on gloves and gathering supplies. "I'll need to clean the wound, check for remaining glass fragments, possibly stitch." Lyric made a sound, small and animal and utterly terrified. Theron was beside her in an instant, his hand finding hers, careful to avoid the injury, his thumb stroking the inside of her wrist in slow, soothing circles. "You're safe," he murmured, his voice dropping to a register meant only for her. I know it hurts. I know you're afraid. But I'm right here and I won't let anyone hurt you. Not him, not Isolde, not anyone. I swear it on my crown and my wolf and every star in the sky. Lyric's hazel eyes found as wide and wet and full of something that looked like hope, struggling to survive in soil that had grown nothing but fear for 3 years. Can you understand me? Theron asked gently. Nod if you can. She nodded, a tiny movement barely perceptible, but there. Good, that's good. His thumb kept moving that steady rhythm against her pulse point. The doctor needs to help you. It's going to hurt. I won't lie to you about that. But you're allowed to scream this time. You're allowed to cry. You're allowed to make every sound you need to make, and no one will punish you for it. Do you understand? Another nod, this one accompanied by a tear that slid down her temple and disappeared into her tangled brown hair. Can I stay? Theron asked. Would that help, or would it make it worse? Lyric's uninjured hand moved before her mind could stop it reaching for him, grasping the blood-soaked fabric of his shirt with desperate fingers. Stay. Please stay. Don't leave me alone with strangers who might hurt me when you're not looking. Theron understood. His hand covered hers, warm and solid and absolutely certain. I'm not going anywhere. Emmett worked with the efficiency of long practice, but even he couldn't make it painless. The wound needed to be irrigated, flushed with silver-free saline to prevent infection, the edges carefully examined for embedded crystal fragments that could cause complications later. Each step made Lyric's body go rigid with pain, made her breathing come in sharp, shallow gasps that sounded like drowning. But true to Theron's word, she made sounds. Small ones at first. Whimpers that escaped between clenched teeth, the kind of noises that came from someone who had been trained not to cry, but whose body was reaching the limits of what silence could endure. Then when Emmett had to probe the deepest part of the wound checking for tendon damage, Lyric screamed. It wasn't loud. Her damaged vocal cords couldn't produce the full-throated sound of real agony. What came out was raspy and broken, and somehow worse for its incompleteness, the cry of something that had forgotten how to ask for help. Theron's other hand came up to cup her face, turning her toward him, making her focus on his eyes instead of what the doctor was doing to her hand. Look at me, he said quietly. Just me. Nothing else. That's it. Breathe. In through your nose, out through your mouth. Match my breathing. Can you do that? Lyric tried, failed, tried again. Her chest hitched and stuttered, but slowly, painfully, her breathing began to sync with his. Deep breath in, slow breath out. The rhythm of survival, of endurance, of making it through 1 second, and then the next, and then the next. There you are, Theron murmured. You're doing beautifully. So brave, so strong. No one had called her brave in 3 years. No one had called her strong. The words felt like water on parched earth, like the first hint of spring after endless winter. Emmett finished cleaning the wound and began the delicate work of stitching. 12 small, precise sutures to close the gash, each one placed with the care of a man who understood that his patient was more than just a body to be repaired. She was the Winter King's mate, which made her effectively royalty, which made this the most important medical procedure Emmett had performed in his entire career. His hands didn't shake. They never did. But his mind raced with implications and consequences, and the dawning realization that everything in the Greystone Pact was about to change. When he finished, he wrapped the hand in clean white bandages, then stepped back to survey his other patient. Not the wound, but the girl herself. What he saw made his stomach turn. Now that she was lying still, now that the immediate crisis had passed, the other injuries became visible. The way she held her neck at a slight angle as if trying to ease pressure on something painful. The precise parallel lines of old scars visible on her inner wrists where her 2 long sleeves had ridden up during the examination. The hollow of her cheeks, the sharpness of her collarbones, the kind of thinness that spoke of meals skipped and portions withheld. And the smell. Beneath the blood and the antiseptic, beneath even the scent of mate bond that made the air between her and Theron practically crackle with electricity, there was something else, something chemical and bitter and wrong. Wolfsbane. Not the trace amounts that sometimes showed up in wolves who worked with poisonous plants. This was concentrated, consistent, the kind of exposure that came from regular, deliberate dosing. My king, Emmett said, carefully aware that he was about to cross into dangerous political territory. I need to examine her neck. Theron's eyes sharpened. Why? I can see smoke damage, very faint but there, and I believe there may be something beneath her collar that's causing active harm. For a moment, Theron didn't move. Then he looked down at Lyric, at the way her free hand had crept up to touch the high neck of her servant's dress, at the fear that had flooded back into her eyes. "May I?" he asked her gently. "I won't force you, but if something's hurting you, I need to know." Lyric's throat worked. Her fingers clutched the fabric like a lifeline, like armor, like the last defense between her secrets and the world. Then slowly she nodded. Theron's fingers were careful as they found the small buttons at the back of her collar, the kind of fasteners designed to be difficult to reach, to require help to make the wearer dependent on others for even the simple act of dressing. He worked them free one by one, and with each button, more of Lyric's neck became visible. The skin was red, angry, blistered in places raw and others marked with a distinctive burn pattern of silver contact. And there, hidden beneath the high collar, was the source, a band of silver-lined leather, thin and cruel, and locked with a mechanism that had no keyhole on the outside, the kind of collar designed to be put on and left on to burn and punish and remind the wearer of their place every minute of every day. Theron went very, very still. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of glaciers calving and mountains cracking. "Who put this on you?" Lyric's eyes darted toward the door, toward where Isolde was somewhere in this massive estate, probably already crafting the stories she would tell, the explanations she would give, the reasonable lies that would make this seem like anything other than what it was. Torture. Systematic, deliberate, sustained. "I see." Theron's hands moved to the collar, examining the lock mechanism with the focused attention of someone who had dealt with restraints before, both as user and once upon a time as victim. "This needs to come off. Now, doctor, do you have bolt cutters?" "In the surgical kit, yes, but..." "Get them." Emmett moved quickly, retrieving a heavy pair of silver-resistant cutters from a lock cabinet. Theron took them without a word, positioned the blades carefully on either side of the lock, and squeezed. The metal screamed, then snapped. The collar fell away, clattering to the tile floor like a shed skin, like a broken chain, like the physical manifestation of 3 years of captivity. Lyric gasped. Her hand flew to her throat, touching the abraded skin with trembling fingers, as if she couldn't quite believe it was gone, as if she expected it to reappear any second to remind her that freedom was an illusion and hope was a cruelty. "It's gone," Theron said firmly. "It's not coming back. If anyone tries to put another one on you, they'll lose their hands first and their life shortly after." He turned to Emmett. "Document everything. Photographs, measurements, written descriptions. I want a complete medical record of every injury, every scar, every sign of abuse. Timestamp it, witness it, make it legal and irrefutable." "Of course, my king." Emmett was already pulling out a camera, already making notes in his precise handwriting. "Though I should warn you, some of these injuries are extensive. The wolfsbane exposure alone suggests years of systematic poisoning. The scarring pattern on her wrists indicates repeated cuts in the exact same location, which is not consistent with self-harm. And the collar burns." He trailed off, shaking his head. "Say it," Theron ordered. "This is torture, my king. Textbook. Sustained. And given her condition, her obvious malnutrition, the fear response, this girl has been kept as a prisoner in her own pack, possibly for years." The temperature in the room dropped, not metaphorically. The actual air grew colder, frost forming on the edges of the windows, breath becoming visible in small white clouds. Theron's wolf was close to the surface. Too close. Pushing against his skin with enough force to make his human shape blur at the edges, to make his eyes flash between silver and gold, like a signal lamp, to fill the room with the presence of something ancient and powerful and absolutely furious. Kale appeared in the doorway, hand on his sword, eyes scanning for threats. He had felt it through the bond that connected Beta to Alpha. That psychic tether that said danger, anger control slipping. "My king," he said carefully, the tone of a man who had talked his Alpha down from the edge more than once. "The pack is stirring. They can feel your rage. We need to manage this carefully." "Carefully," Theron repeated the word, dripping with contempt. "They tortured my mate, Kale. They starved her and poisoned her and locked silver around her throat and let her bleed on marble floors while they sipped champagne. Where exactly does careful enter into this? I understand, my king, but if you lose control, if you let your wolf out in the middle of Ashford Estate, you'll kill everyone within 100 yards, including her." The words hit like cold water. Theron's eyes snapped to Lyric, who had curled into herself on the examination table, making herself small again, disappearing into the space between her own ribs. She was afraid of him, of his rage, of his power, of the violence that lived in his bones and had kept him alive through battles and challenges and assassination attempts. He was terrifying her. Theron took a breath, held it, released it slowly, forcing his wolf back down, forcing the frost to recede from the windows, forcing himself back into the shape of a man instead of the monster he could so easily become. "You're right," he said quietly. "Thank you." Kael nodded and stepped back, but he didn't leave. Didn't sheathe his sword. He knew his king knew the signs, knew that the danger wasn't over, just postponed. Emmett cleared his throat. "My king, there's one more thing I need to check." Her hand should have already started healing. Even with the wolfsbane in her system, even with the malnutrition, a wound this clean should show some sign of regeneration. But he carefully unwrapped a corner of the bandage. The wound looked exactly the same as it had 10 minutes ago. No pink tissue forming at the edges. No sign of the accelerated healing that was every shifter's birthright. "That's wrong," Kael said from the doorway. "Even an Omega would be showing improvement by now." "Unless," Emmett said, slowly looking at Lyric with new eyes, "the wolfsbane suppression is so complete that her wolf can't surface enough to trigger healing, which would require, I don't even want to think about the dosage that would require." Or, Theron said, a new thought crystallizing, "she's been trained to hide it." 3 pairs of eyes turned to Lyric. She had gone very still, the kind of stillness that prey animals adopt when a predator is looking directly at them. Theron knelt beside the examination table, bringing himself to her eye level. "Lyric," he said gently. "That's your name, isn't it? I heard Isolde say it in the ballroom." A tiny nod. "Lyric, beautiful name. It suits you." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Your hand is healing, isn't it? You're hiding it because showing it would be dangerous. Because if Isolde knew how fast you could recover, she would know you're not what she claims you are." Lyric's breathing quickened. Her eyes darted between Theron and the door, calculating escape routes, measuring distances, the automatic assessment of someone who had survived by staying 2 steps ahead of discovery. "It's all right," Theron said softly. "You don't have to hide anymore. Not from me, not from Kael, not from Dr. Graves. We're not going to hurt you. And we're sure as hell not going to tell Isolde." Silence. Then so slowly it was almost painful to watch Lyric extended her bandaged hand toward Emmett. He unwrapped it, completely gentle and methodical, peeling away the layers of white gauze until the wound was exposed again. It had healed, not completely, but significantly. The deepest part of the puncture had already closed, new tissue forming in smooth pink lines. Another hour and it would be barely visible. Another day and there would be no trace except a thin white line that could have come from anywhere. "Moon above," Emmett breathed. "That's alpha-level healing, possibly higher. I've never seen regeneration that fast outside of direct bloodline royalty." Kael moved closer, his tactical mind already racing ahead to implications and consequences. If she's been hiding this for 3 years, if she's been deliberately re-injuring herself to maintain the appearance of weakness, then she's not a simple servant, Theron finished. And Isolde knows it, or suspects it, or is terrified it might be true. He looked at Lyric with new understanding, seeing past the fear and the damage to the intelligence beneath. This girl had survived 3 years of torture, not through luck or pity, but through strategy. Through careful management of information, through calculated displays of helplessness, through making herself appear harmless when she was anything but. "Who are you really, Tutu?" he asked quietly. Lyric's mouth opened, closed. Her hand moved to her throat, touching the raw skin where the collar had been feeling for the voice that had been taken from her. Nothing came out, just air and frustration and the ghost of words that couldn't find their shape. "It's all right," Theron said quickly. "You don't have to speak. Can you write?" A nod. Emmett handed over a clipboard and pen. Lyric took them with shaking hands, the pen hovering over the paper for a long moment before she began to write. Her handwriting was small and cramped, the letters formed by someone who had learned to write in secret, in stolen moments in the margins of her own survival. When she finished, she held the clipboard out to Theron. He read it once, twice, then looked up at her with an expression that combined wonder and rage and a grief so profound it made the air feel heavy. "Kael," he said, his voice carefully controlled, "I need you to go to the estate's record room. Find the official documents from 3 years ago. The fire, the deaths, the transfer of power. Everything. My king, just do it. And Kael, be subtle. If Isolde realizes we're investigating, she'll destroy evidence. Or create more problems. Possibly both." Kael bowed and disappeared silent as a shadow deadly as winter wind. Emmett looked at the clipboard, at the words written there in that cramped, desperate handwriting. 3 years ago there was a fire. My parents died. Alpha Dorian Ashford and Luna Seraphine, they said it was an accident. They said I was lucky to survive. They lied. We need to hear this story, Wupo, Theron said, pulling a chair close to the examination table and settling into it with the patience of someone prepared to stay as long as necessary. All of it, from the beginning. But first, he stood shrugged out of his ruined jacket and draped it around Lyric's shoulders. It swallowed her, the fine black wool hanging nearly to her knees, still warm from his body heat. You're shaking, he explained, and I suspect you've been cold for a very long time. Lyric pulled the jacket tighter around herself, breathing in the scent of winter pine and the promise of safety, feeling something in her chest crack open just a little, just enough to let in the possibility that maybe she had finally found someone who would listen, someone who would believe, someone who would care. She picked up the pen again and began to write the story of her own murder. The words came slowly at first, then faster, spilling onto page after pen as if 3 years of silence had created a dam that was finally breaking. Emmett had to bring more paper, then more. Theron read each page as she finished it, his expression growing darker and colder with every paragraph, with every detail, with every small horror that added up to a picture of systematic destruction. The fire hadn't been an accident. 3 years ago, on a cold November night, Lyric had been 18 years old and preparing to undergo the Luna trials, the ancient test that would have confirmed her as her father's heir, the next alpha of the Greystone Pack. She had trained her entire life for that moment, had learned strategy and diplomacy and how to fight with tooth and claw and silver blade, had memorized the pack genealogies and territorial boundaries and alliance treaties. She had been ready, and Isolde, distant cousin and perpetual also-ran, had been desperate. Lyric wrote it all down, how she had woken in the middle of the night to the smell of smoke, how she had run toward her parents' private study where they kept the pack archives and the ceremonial weapons and the chalice of the first wolves that was supposed to be myth and legend and nothing more, how she had found the study door barred from the outside. Heavy wooden beams wedged into place, impossible to move from within the kind of barrier that took time to construct and malice to imagine. How she had heard her parents inside shouting, coughing, their voices growing weaker as the smoke grew thicker. How she had tried to break down the door, had thrown her whole body against it again and again, feeling bones crack and skin tear, screaming for help that never came. How Brennan had found her, the beta guard who had served her father with absolute loyalty. How he had pulled her away from the door, even as she fought him, even as she clawed and bit, and begged him to let her go, to let her die with her parents rather than live without them. How he had whispered, harsh and urgent, that if she died too, then Isolde would have won completely. That someone needed to survive to bear witness, to remember, to seek justice when the time came. How the roof had collapsed just as they reached the garden. How the entire wing had gone up in flames so hot and fast that no normal fire could have caused it. How the smell of accelerant had been thick in the air, but disappeared by morning, leaving only ash and convenient explanations. How the council had investigated for exactly 3 days before declaring it an accident. Electrical fault in the old wiring. Tragic. Unavoidable. These things happen in historic estates. How Isolde had produced documents signed and witnessed showing that Dorian had named her as backup alpha in case of emergency. How those documents had been dated 6 months earlier, though Lyric had never seen her father sign anything of the kind. How the vote had been quick and unanimous and suspiciously well organized for a pack supposedly in mourning. How Lyric had tried to speak, to object, to tell them what she had seen, and how her voice had failed her. The smoke damage was real. The vocal cord trauma was documented by 3 separate doctors, all of whom confirmed that she would likely never speak normally again, that the scarring was permanent, that the damage was consistent with prolonged smoke inhalation. But the psychological damage was worse. Every time Lyric tried to force words past her damaged throat, Isolde was there. With sympathetic smiles and gentle hands and suggestions, always suggestions, that perhaps poor dear Lyric should rest, should not strain herself, should accept that some things were beyond her control. And if Lyric persisted, if she tried too hard, if she pushed through the pain to make herself heard, well, there were consequences, private consequences, the kind that happened behind closed doors in empty corridors in the coal cellar where no one could hear screams that didn't make sound. Silence became her only armor. 3 years taught her that truth in blood. Learned to swallow her words and her truth and her rage. Learned to become invisible. The last page was the hardest to read. I don't know if she killed them herself or hired someone to do it. I don't know if the council is complicit or just cowardly. I don't know if anyone else suspects the truth. But I know I'm not crazy. I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And I know that if I die, she wins. So I stay alive. I scrub floors and swallow poison and let her hurt me because someday, somehow, someone will see the truth. Someone will believe me. Please believe me. Theron set down the last page with hands that shook very slightly. For a long moment he didn't speak, didn't move, just sat there with his head bowed, absorbing the weight of what he had just read, feeling it settle into his bones like frost, like fury, like a debt that demanded payment. When he finally looked up, his eyes were gold again. But this time it wasn't rage, it was something colder, more deliberate. "I believe you," he said quietly. "Every word. And I swear to you, Lyric Ashford, on my crown and my blood, and the moon goddess herself, that Isolde will answer for what she's done." Lyric's eyes filled with tears. She had been strong through the writing, through the remembering, through the reopening of wounds that had never properly healed. But now hearing someone say those three simple words, "I believe you," she broke. The sobs came silently, her damaged voice unable to give them sound, but her whole body shook with them. Tears streamed down her face and dripped onto Theron's jacket, darkening the expensive wool. Theron stood and gathered her into his arms, careful of her injured hand, mindful of the burns on her neck. He held her while she cried 3 years' worth of grief and terror and helpless rage. Held her until the sobs subsided into hiccups, until the hiccups faded into exhausted breathing, until she sagged against him like a puppet with cut strings. "Rest," he murmured into her hair. "You're safe now. I've got you." And for the first time in 3 years, Lyric Ashford closed her eyes and believed it might be true. The east wing of Ashford Estate had been built during a more optimistic time when the pack was wealthy and expanding, and believed that their prosperity would last forever. 20 guest suites, each one appointed with silk curtains and mahogany furniture, and fireplaces large enough to roast a whole deer. The kind of luxury meant to impress visiting dignitaries and cement alliances through displays of casual wealth. For the last decade, most of the rooms had sat empty, gathering dust behind locked doors, relics of a golden age that had ended long before Lyric was born. Until tonight. Theron carried Lyric through the corridors like she weighed nothing, her head resting against his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. Behind them, Kael moved like a shadow hand never far from his blade, eyes scanning every doorway and alcove for threats that probably weren't coming, but might be. The room Theron chose was the corner suite, the one with windows facing both east and south. The one that had belonged to visiting royalty back when the Ashford pack had been important enough to host such guests. Emmett had gone ahead to prepare it, lighting the fireplace, turning down the massive four-poster bed with its quilted coverlet and mountain of pillows. It was, Lyric thought distantly, the most beautiful room she had ever seen, and it terrified her. Theron felt her stiffen in his arms. He paused in the doorway, looking down at her with concern. "What's wrong?" Lyric's eyes darted around the room, cataloging exits, measuring distances, calculating how quickly she could escape if this turned out to be a trap. If the kindness was a game, if the protection was a lie designed to make her lower her guard before the real punishment began. "You don't trust it," Theron said softly. It wasn't a question. "You don't trust me. That's fair, smart even. I'm a stranger who showed up at a party and upended your entire world. For all you know, I could be worse than Isolde." He crossed to the bed and set her down gently on the edge, then immediately stepped back, putting distance between them, giving her space to breathe. "So let me be very clear about what's happening here." He continued, his voice formal, now the tone of a king making official proclamations. "This is your room, not mine. I'm not staying here. I'm not expecting anything from you. You can lock the door from the inside. There's a bathroom through that door, fully stocked. Food will be brought up at regular intervals. You don't have to ask. You don't have to earn it. It will just appear. If you need anything else, there's a bell pull by the bed. Someone will come. They will not hurt you. They will not judge you. They will help you, or they will answer to me." Lyric stared at him, trying to process the words, trying to understand why a king would give orders that benefited her, that cost him something, that made her comfort more important than his desires. "I know you have no reason to believe me," Theron said quietly, "but I need you to try. Just for tonight. Just long enough to sleep in a real bed and eat real food and remember what it feels like to be safe." He moved toward the door, then paused, looking back at her. "One more thing. If Isolde or anyone else tries to come into this room without your permission, they will have to go through Kael first. And Kael has killed bigger threats than one corrupt Alpha Queen." In the hallway, Kael nodded once, his scarred face settling into an expression that promised violence to anyone stupid enough to test him. Theron bowed slightly, a gesture of respect, that kings didn't give to servants, that predators didn't give to prey. Good night, Lyric. I hope you can rest. Then he was gone, the door clicking shut behind him, and Lyric was alone in a room that was bigger than the entire coal cellar, softer than any surface she had touched in 3 years, warmer than she had any right to be. She sat very still for a long time, waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the punishment that had to be coming, for reality to reassert itself and remind her that girls like her didn't get rooms like this, didn't get kings who carried them and doctors who cared and guards who protected. Nothing happened. The fire crackled. The bed waited. Outside the windows, the moon rose over the mountains, full and silver, and absolutely indifferent to the small dramas of wolves pretending to be human. Lyric's stomach chose that moment to remind her that she had eaten exactly one piece of bread in the last 24 hours, that the champagne she'd been carrying had been meant for guests, not servants, that hunger was a constant companion she had learned to ignore but never quite conquered. As if summoned by her thoughts, someone knocked softly on the door. Lyric froze. Her hand crept toward the fireplace poker, the only weapon within reach, her mind already cataloging how she could use it if this was a trick, if this was Isolde coming to punish her for daring to accept help. Miss Ashford, a woman's voice gentle and uncertain. It's Martha, from the kitchens. I've brought you some supper. Martha, Lyric remembered her. Remembered kind hands, sneaking her crusts of bread. Remembered whispered apologies when the portions got smaller. Remembered the helpless sorrow in her eyes every time Isolde dealt out casual cruelties. She went to the door, hesitated, then slowly, carefully turned the lock. Martha stood in the hallway holding a covered tray, her plump face creased with concern and something that looked like shame. "Oh, child," she breathed, taking in Lyric's appearance, the borrowed jacket, the bandaged hand, the raw skin on her neck, where the collar had been. "What she did to you, what we all let her do. I'm so sorry. I'm so very sorry." Lyric shook her head, a tiny gesture that said, "It's not your fault you couldn't have stayed. Her survival is survival." "The king said you were to have whatever you wanted," Martha continued, bustling into the room and setting the tray on a small table by the window. "But I didn't know what you wanted, so I brought a bit of everything. Roasted chicken, fresh bread, butter, honey cheese, apples, and there's hot tea with cream and sugar." She lifted the cover, revealing more food than Lyric had seen in one place in 3 years. Real food, hot food, food that smelled like comfort and normalcy, and all the meals she had served to others while her own stomach cramped with hunger. "I'll leave you to it," Martha said, already moving toward the door. Then she paused, turned back, and did something that made Lyric's breath catch. She curtsied, not the perfunctory bob that servants gave to other servants, a real curtsy, deep and respectful, the kind reserved for alphas and visiting royalty. "It's an honor to serve you, Miss Ashford, a true honor." Then she was gone, and Lyric was alone with enough food to feed 3 people and no idea how to begin. She approached the table like it might bite her, touched the edge of the plate with one finger, half expecting it to disappear to reveal itself as an illusion or a test or another layer of cruelty. It stayed solid, real, warm. Lyric picked up a piece of bread. It was soft and fresh, still slightly warm from the oven, the crust golden and perfect. She tore off a small piece and put it in her mouth. The taste exploded across her tongue. Butter and salt and yeast and all the complex flavors that came from bread made with skill and care instead of grabbed from yesterday's leftovers. She chewed slowly, savoring it, feeling the texture, the substance, the proof that she was here alive, eating real food in a real room. She ate another piece, then another. Then she pulled the chair close to the table and began to eat in earnest, years of deprivation, overwhelming manners and caution. She ate the chicken with her fingers, not caring about grease or propriety. She ate the cheese in thick slices, the apples in crunching bites, the honey straight from the vine with a spoon that was actual silver, not the tin she was used to. She ate until her stomach hurt, until the hollow ache that had been her constant companion for 3 years finally temporarily ceased its gnawing. Then she stumbled to the bathroom and vomited it all back up. Her body wasn't used to rich food anymore, wasn't used to quantity. The sudden abundance had been too much, too fast, and her stomach was rejecting it with violent efficiency. Lyric knelt on the cold tile floor, forehead resting against the porcelain toilet, and cried. Not because she was sad, because she was angry. Angry at her body for betraying her, angry at Isolde for starving her so thoroughly that even kindness made her sick, angry at herself for not being stronger, for not being able to keep down the first real meal she'd had in years. She didn't hear the door open, didn't hear footsteps crossing the bedroom. The first she knew she wasn't alone was when a warm hand touched her shoulder. Lyric jerked away, scrambling backward, her injured hand hitting the wall and sending fresh pain shooting up her arm. Theron knelt in the bathroom doorway, hands raised in surrender, his expression carefully neutral. "I heard you," he said, quietly. "I was in the room next door. I'm sorry, I should have warned you I'd be close. I wanted to be near in case." He gestured vaguely. "In case something happened," which it did. "Are you all right?" Lyric shook her head. No, she wasn't all right. She was broken and damaged and couldn't even eat food without her body rejecting it. Couldn't accept kindness without suspicion. Couldn't trust that safety was real. "May I come in?" Theron asked. "I won't touch you. I've been where you are. Not exactly, but close enough, and might be able to help." Lyric nodded, too exhausted to maintain her guard, too sick to care if this was a mistake. Theron moved slowly, telegraphing every motion, making himself as unthreatening as a 6'4" apex predator could be. He sat on the floor with his back against the bathtub, leaving several feet of space between them. "Your body isn't used to rich food anymore," he said matter-of-factly. "When I was 20, I got captured by a rival pack during a border dispute. They kept me for 6 weeks. Fed me enough to keep me alive, nothing more. When my pack finally got me back, first thing I did was eat everything in sight. Lasted about 20 minutes before I was hugging the toilet, just like you." He smiled slightly, a self-deprecating expression that made him look younger, less king, and more just a man who understood. "Doctor told me I had to retrain my stomach. Start small, plain foods, bread and broth and bland things. Work my way back up to normal portions. Took about 2 weeks before I could eat a real meal again." Lyric looked at him with new understanding. He had been a prisoner too, had been starved too, had felt his body betray him too. The knowledge settled something in her chest, some small piece of the isolation that said she was alone in this, that no one could understand. "I'll have Martha bring up some plain toast and weak tea," Theron continued. "You can try again in an hour or so. Just a little bit. Don't force it. Your stomach will adjust, I promise." He stood to leave, then hesitated. "Lyric, can I ask you something?" She nodded warily. "When was the last time you had a full meal? Not scraps, not leftovers. A real meal where you ate until you were satisfied." Lyric thought back. Days blurred together in the coal cellar, measured not in calendar dates, but in cycles of pain and survival. Weeks became months, became years, and food was always scarce, always conditional, always tied to some task completed or some cruelty endured. She held up 3 fingers. 3 days, Theron asked. She shook her head, pointed to the 3 fingers again, then made a sweeping gesture that encompassed time, that suggested duration, that tried to communicate what her voice couldn't. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed immediately by fury so intense, the temperature in the bathroom dropped several degrees. 3 years, he said flatly. You haven't had a full meal in 3 years. Lyric nodded. Theron closed his eyes and took a long, slow breath, the kind meant to leash rage that wanted to burn down buildings and slaughter everyone inside. When he opened them again, the gold had receded, but the promise of violence lingered in the set of his jaw. That changes now, he said quietly. Starting tonight. Starting right now, you will be fed Lyric. Properly, regularly, as much as you can handle, as often as you need it. That's not a gift. That's not charity. That's basic dignity, and Isolde stole it from you. He paused at the door, looking back. Get some rest. I'll be next door, if you need me. And Lyric, you're not going back to that cellar. Not tonight, not ever. That part of your life is over. After he left, Lyric sat on the bathroom floor for a long time, processing, adjusting, trying to believe that anything in her life could actually be over, that change could be real and permanent, instead of just another temporary cruelty. Eventually she stood, washed her face, looked at herself in the mirror. The girl staring back was a stranger. Hollow-cheeked and haunted-eyed, with skin too pale and hair too tangled, and the kind of thinness that spoke of systematic deprivation. But there was something else there too. Something that hadn't been there this morning. A spark, faint but present. The ember of hope that maybe, just maybe, the king who smelled like mountain storms and frozen earth was telling the truth. That maybe she was worth protecting after all. Lyric woke to sunlight streaming through windows she had forgotten to close and the smell of breakfast cooking somewhere nearby. For one disoriented moment, she couldn't remember where she was, couldn't reconcile the soft mattress beneath her with the hard stone she'd grown accustomed to, couldn't understand why her body didn't hurt. Then memory crashed back. The ballroom, the blood, Theron's arms carrying her to safety. She sat up quickly, too quickly, and her head swam. The bandage on her hand had come partially unwrapped during the night, and when she peeled it back to check the wound, she found exactly what she'd known she would find. Healed. Completely. Not even a scar. Alpha blood. Royal blood. The secret she'd been hiding for 3 years written in her body's betrayal of normalcy. A knock on the door made her fumble to rewrap the bandage to hide the evidence before whoever was outside could see. "Miss Ashford," Martha's voice again. "I've brought breakfast. Plain toast and chamomile tea, like His Majesty ordered." Lyric went to the door still wearing Theron's jacket over the ruined servant's dress from last night and opened it. Martha stood in the hallway with another tray, but this time she wasn't alone. Beside her stood a young woman Lyric vaguely recognized from the house staff holding an armful of clothing. "His Majesty thought you might want fresh clothes," Martha explained. "These are from the guest wardrobe. Should fit you well enough until we can have something proper made." The clothes were simple but clean. A soft gray dress in a style meant for day wear, not servitude. Undergarments that weren't threadbare. Stockings without holes. Shoes that would actually fit instead of the two large cast-offs she'd been given before. Lyric took them with trembling hands, not quite believing they were meant for her, that she was allowed to wear something that wasn't stained or torn or deliberately too big. "There's a bath drawn as well," the young woman said shyly, "with soap and everything. His Majesty said you were to have whatever you needed." A bath. Hot water, soap that didn't smell like harsh chemicals and broken dreams. Lyric's eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. She nodded her thanks, took the clothes and breakfast tray, and retreated back into the room before the emotions could overwhelm her completely. The bathroom was indeed prepared. Steam rose from a deep copper tub filled with water so hot it had turned the mirrors foggy. Small bottles lined the edge soap shampoo oils that smelled of lavender and mint and things she couldn't identify, but which promised luxury she had never been allowed to experience. She set the breakfast tray aside and approached the tub like it was a wild animal that might spook. Touched the water with one finger. It was perfect. Hot enough to ease the constant ache in her muscles, not so hot it would burn. Lyric stripped off the borrowed jacket and the ruined dress, the clothes that had carried her through the worst night of her life, and deposited her somehow on the other side. She stepped into the tub and sank down until the water covered her shoulders. The heat was shocking. Overwhelming. After 3 years of cold water, sluiced from buckets of washing, with harsh soap in dark corners, where no one could see, of never being truly warm or truly clean, the sensation of submersion in actual hot water was almost painful. She stayed there for a long time, letting the heat soak into her bones, watching 3 years of coal dust and blood and despair swirl down the drain, when she finally worked up the energy to scrub. She washed her hair 3 times, working out the tangles, feeling the texture change from matted straw to something approaching silk. When she finally emerged pink-skinned and dizzy from the heat, she found the breakfast tray waiting on the small table by the window. Plain toast just as promised. Weak tea with a small pot of honey. This time she ate slowly. One small bite of toast, a sip of tea, waiting to see if her stomach would rebel again. It didn't. She ate another bite. Then another. The whole piece of toast disappeared, followed by a second, and her stomach tentatively decided to accept the offering. Small victories. But victories nonetheless. She was just finishing the tea when another knock came at the door. This one was different. Heavier. More authoritative. Lyric, Theron's voice. "Are you decent? May I come in?" Lyric looked down at herself. She had put on the gray dress, soft cotton, that fit almost perfectly, that made her look less like a servant and more like an actual person. Her hair was still damp, hanging in waves down her back, but she was clean and clothed and more presentable than she'd been in years. She opened the door. Theron stood in the hallway wearing different clothes than last night, the blood-stained shirt replaced with a dark blue linen that made his eyes look more silver than gray. His hair was damp too, suggesting he had also bathed. Behind him, Kale stood at attention, and beside Kale, Brennan, the beta guard who had pulled her from the fire, who had saved her life at the cost of her parents, who had watched her suffer for 3 years and done what little he could within the constraints of his own survival. He looked older than she remembered. Gray streaked his brown hair, and new lines carved canyons around his eyes and mouth. Guilt wore on a person, apparently. Made them age faster than time alone could account for. "Brennan has something to tell you," Theron said quietly. "Something I think you need to hear. May we come in?" Lyric hesitated, then stepped back, allowing them entry into her sanctuary, into the space that had become her first taste of safety in 3 years. Brennan crossed the threshold like a man walking to his own execution. He stopped several feet away from her, maintaining distance, respecting her space in a way that spoke of understanding what trauma did to a person's need for control. Miss Ashford, he began, his voice rough with emotion, I owe you an explanation and an apology, and probably my life, though I suspect that's not yours to take anymore. He glanced at Theron, who had positioned himself near the window, giving Lyric and Brennan room while still remaining close enough to intervene if needed. 3 years ago, Brennan continued, I failed your father. Alpha Dorian gave me one job: protect the pack, protect his family. I was supposed to be watching the estate that night. I was supposed to notice if something was wrong. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. But I didn't. I was in the barracks going over supply inventories, doing paperwork like it mattered, like there wasn't a viper in our midst planning murder. By the time I smelled the smoke, it was already too late. The study was an inferno. The doors were barred. And your parents... His voice broke. I heard your father shouting, heard him trying to break through the door from the inside, heard your mother praying to the moon goddess, heard the moment they stopped making sound. Lyric's breathing had gone shallow. She hadn't known this part, hadn't known the exact sequence of their deaths, the timeline of their suffering. I found you trying to break down the door, Brennan said, throwing yourself at it over and over. You'd broken 3 ribs and dislocated your shoulder, and you just kept going, kept trying, even though it was already too late, even though they were already gone. He looked at her directly now, his eyes wet. I pulled you away, dragged you kicking and screaming to the garden while the roof collapsed. And I made a choice. The wrong choice, probably, but the only one I could see in that moment. You decided to hide her, Theron said softly, to make everyone think she was just another victim, too damaged to be a threat. Brennan nodded. Isolde was already consolidating power, already had half the council in her pocket. If she knew Lyric could heal, could fight back, could potentially challenge her claim, she would have finished the job that night, would have made it look like smoke inhalation or grief or any of a dozen convenient explanations. He turned back to Lyric. So I taught you to hide, taught you to be small and broken and invisible, taught you to suppress your healing, to accept punishment, to survive at any cost. I turned you into a ghost in your own home because yet I couldn't figure out how to save you any other way. Silence fell heavy and complicated. I don't expect forgiveness, Brennan said quietly. I watched her torture you, watched her starve you and collar you and break you piece by piece. I was a coward. I chose my own survival over your dignity, and I will carry that shame to my grave. Lyric stared at him for a long moment, then slowly she crossed the distance between them. Brennan went very still, clearly expecting a blow, a rejection, the consequences he had been dreading for 3 years. Instead, Lyric hugged him. It was brief and awkward, her thin arms barely reaching around his broad shoulders, but the intention was clear. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. Acknowledgement that survival sometimes required impossible choices, that guilt was its own punishment, that they had both done what they had to do to make it to this moment. When she stepped back, Brennan was crying openly, tears streaming down his scarred face. Thank you, he whispered. I don't deserve it, but thank you. She's more generous than I am, Theron said, his tone carrying an edge that made Brennan straighten. Because I'm significantly less understanding about adults who watch children suffer and do nothing. Understood, my king. However, Theron continued, Lyric seems to value your loyalty, and I need people I can trust in this nest of vipers. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell me everything you know about Isolde's operation. Every bribe, every threat, every piece of leverage she has over the council. You're going to help me build a case so airtight that even her bought and paid for allies can't ignore it. And you're going to do it because you owe this girl 3 years of protection you failed to provide. Yes, my king. And Brennan, Theron's voice dropped to something cold and absolutely certain. If I find out you've lied to me, if I discover you're still playing both sides, if you do anything that puts Lyric at risk, Kale will introduce you to pain you didn't know existed. Are we clear, Crystal, my king? Good, now get out. Kale will take your statement in the library. I need to speak with Lyric alone. Brennan bowed to Lyric one more time, a gesture of respect and regret, and something that might have been hope, then left with KL trailing behind him. Theron waited until the door closed before turning to Lyric with an expression that was equal parts concern and determination. We need to talk about what happens next, he said, and I need you to understand something very important. He crossed the room to stand in front of her, close but not touching, his presence warm and solid and absolutely focused. I'm going to protect you, he said quietly. Not because you're my mate, though that's reason enough. Not because I'm a king, and you're a victim, though that factors in. But because what Isolde did to you is an abomination, and I will not stand by while it continues. He paused, making sure she was listening, making sure she understood. But protection isn't the same as control. This is your fight, Lyric. Your justice. Your choice how we proceed. I can give you resources and allies and the weight of the Northern Crown. But I won't take this from you, won't make decisions about your life without your input. He pulled a chair close and sat, bringing himself to her eye level. So I'm going to ask you a question, and I need you to think very carefully about your answer, because everything that comes next depends on it. Theron leaned forward, his silver eyes intense and utterly serious. Do you want to run? I can get you out of here tonight, take you north, give you a new identity, let you live in peace, far away from Ashford Estate and everything it represents. No shame in that choice. Survival is valid. Safety is valid. He paused. Or do you want to fight? Do you want to face Isolde? Expose what she did take back and what was stolen from you. Because if that's what you want, if you're ready for that battle, I will stand beside you. I will help you burn her empire to ash and rebuild something better from the ruins. His hand hovered near hers, not quite touching, offering connection without demanding it. What do you want, Lyric? Ashford run, or fight safety or justice? The question hung in the air between them, weighted with consequence, with possibility, with the first real choice Lyric had been offered in 3 years. She looked at him. At this king who had crashed into her life like a storm, who had seen her when she was invisible, who had believed her when everyone else had looked away. Then she looked past him toward the window, toward the estate that had been her home, and her prison, toward the future that was suddenly impossibly hers to decide. Her hand moved to the table, found the pen and paper Emmett had left the night before, wrote 3 words in her small, determined handwriting. Theron picked up the paper and read it. A slow, fierce smile spread across his face, the kind of smile that promised war and retribution and justice served cold. Good, he said softly. Then let's remind Isolde exactly who she stole this pack from. The words Lyric had written were simple, clear, absolute. I want both. Theron picked up the paper and read it. A slow, fierce smile spread across his face, the kind of smile that promised war and retribution and justice served cold. Good, he said softly. Then let's remind Isolde exactly who she stole this pack from. He set the paper down and pulled a chair closer, settling into it with the focused intensity of a general planning a campaign. Here's what happens next, Theron said, his voice dropping to the register of strategy and calculation. Tonight you rest, actually rest. No fear, no waiting for punishment, no sleeping with one eye open. KL is outside your door. I'm in the room next to yours. You are safe. Lyric nodded slowly, though her eyes still held doubt. 3 years of terror didn't evaporate in a single night, no matter how many kings made promises. Theron saw it, understood it. Tomorrow, he continued, we start building the case. Brennan will help us access your father's private records. Isolde is clever, but she's not perfect. She'll have missed something. A ledger, a letter, a witness she thought she'd silenced thoroughly enough. We find those cracks, and we widen them until her entire empire collapses. He stood and crossed to the window, looking out over the darkened grounds of Ashford Estate. The council meets in 3 days. Full session. They've already sent word that they want to discuss my unexpected arrival, my unprecedented claim of mate bond, and what they delicately call the disruption of their winter ball. His laugh was cold. They think they're summoning me to explain myself. Instead, they're going to sit in that chamber and hear every crime Isolde has committed. And they're going to answer for their complicity. Lyric reached for the pen again, wrote quickly. What if they don't believe me? What if the council is too corrupt? Theron turned from the window, his silver eyes catching the firelight. Then I invoke crown law. As Alpha King of the Northern Realm, I have the authority to dissolve a pack leadership if I can prove dereliction of duty or criminal conspiracy. It's rarely used. The political fallout is significant. But for you, he crossed back to her, kneeling so they were eye level. I would burn every alliance I've built. I would face down the entire Council of Alphas. I would start a war if that's what it took to give you justice. The intensity in his gaze made Lyric's breath catch. No one had ever looked at her like this. Like she mattered more than politics, more than peace, more than anything. But it won't come to that, Theron continued, standing. Because you're not going to that council meeting as a victim. You're going as an alpha. And when you walk into that chamber, he smiled again, sharp and satisfied. They're going to remember exactly who the Ashford bloodline is. Lyric wrote how I can't even speak. You don't need to speak, Theron said. Not yet. Your evidence will speak. Brennan will speak. I will speak. And when the moment is right, when Isolde has nowhere left to run, he paused, making sure she was listening. You shift. You show them the white wolf. You show them what royal blood looks like when it stops hiding. And every wolf in that room will feel the alpha command in their bones. Lyric's hand trembled as she wrote, I've never shifted in front of anyone. What if I can't control it? You controlled it for 3 years while being poisoned and starved and tortured, Theron said quietly. You have more control than any wolf I've ever met. When the time comes, your wolf will know what to do. He moved toward the door, then paused, his hand on the frame. Can I tell you something, he asked. About the mate bond? Lyric nodded. When I walked into that ballroom tonight, I wasn't looking for you. I'd given up, honestly. 12 years of searching, hundreds of introduction balls, political marriages, proposed and declined. I thought the moon goddess had simply decided I wasn't meant to have a mate. His voice softened, became almost vulnerable. And then I caught your scent. Rain and night-blooming jasmine like summer storms over wildflower meadows. It hit me so hard, I actually stopped breathing for a second. Kale thought I was having a stroke. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. I looked up, and there you were, small and terrified and trying so hard to be invisible. And my wolf just knew. Not because you were beautiful, though you are. Not because you were an alpha, though I suspected. But because you were mine. The other half of something I didn't even know was broken. Lyric's eyes had filled with tears again. So when I knelt in your blood tonight, Theron continued, when I carried you out of that ballroom, when I threatened to dismantle this estate stone by stone, that wasn't politics. That wasn't strategy. That was a male protecting his mate. And I would do it again, every time, without hesitation. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. Set it on the table beside her. This belonged to my mother, he said quietly. She died when I was young, childbirth complications. But before she did, she made my father promise that when I found my mate, I would give her this. Lyric unwrapped the cloth carefully. Inside was a silver comb, delicate and ancient, inlaid with tiny moonstones, that caught the firelight and turned it into starshine. You don't have to accept it, Theron said quickly. I'm not asking you to claim the bond tonight. I'm not asking you for anything except time. Time to heal. Time to trust. Time to believe that I mean what I say. He moved to the door again. I'll be next door. If you need anything, knock on the wall. 3 taps means emergency. 2 taps means you just want company. His smile turned self-deprecating. I'm told I'm decent company when I'm not threatening people. Lyric stood on shaky legs crossed to him before she could second-guess herself and touched his arm, just briefly, just enough. Blue sparks danced where her fingers met his sleeve. She pulled back startled, but Theron's expression had gone soft with wonder. Every time we touch, he murmured. Every single time the bond gets stronger. Can you feel it? Lyric nodded. She could. It was like a golden thread connecting her heart to his, growing brighter, more solid, more real with each moment they spent together. Sleep well, Lyric Ashford, Theron said. Tomorrow we start taking back your life. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him, and Lyric was alone with the fire and the moonlight and the silver comb that proved someone had been waiting for her even when she hadn't known to hope. She picked up the comb and ran her fingers over the moonstones. They were warm to the touch, as if they carried some echo of the woman who had warned them, the queen who had chosen a wild northern wolf and loved him enough to make him promise impossible things. Outside her door, Kale settled into position, his back against the wall, his hand never far from his blade. In the room next door, Theron lay on top of the covers fully dressed, every sense attuned to the woman sleeping on the other side of the wall. If Isolde made a move tonight, she would find the Winter King waiting. And far below in the private chambers that had once belonged to Alpha Dorian, Isolde stared at her reflection in the mirror and saw the black veins creeping up her neck. The chalice sat on her desk, no longer glowing, the liquid inside turned dark and viscous. It was rejecting her. She had days, maybe hours, and the only cure was the blood of a true Ashford. Isolde's reflection smiled sharp and cruel and absolutely desperate. If the Winter King wanted war, she would give him war. But first she would take back what was hers. The night deepened. The estate settled into uneasy silence. And in the east wing, in a room filled with firelight and moonshine, and the faint scent of winter frost and ancient wood, Lyric Ashford fell asleep holding a silver comb and dreaming for the first time in 3 years of mourning. Dawn broke over Ashford Estate, painting the mountains in shades of amber and rose. Lyric woke to the sound of voices in the hallway. Not angry voices, not threatening ones, just the low murmur of Kael speaking with someone, the rustle of fabric, the soft clink of china. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then she saw the silver comb on the bedside table catching the morning light, and memory flooded back. Safe. She was safe. The knock came softly. Miss Ashford, breakfast is here. Martha again with another tray. But this time when Lyric opened the door, Theron stood beside the older woman, fully dressed in riding clothes, his hair still damp from washing. Good morning, he said, and his smile was warm, genuine, the kind that crinkled the corners of his eyes. I thought you might like company for breakfast, if that's all right. Lyric nodded, stepping back to let them in. Martha set the tray on the small table. More plain toast, soft-boiled eggs, weak tea, food her stomach could handle. But there was also a small vase with a single white rose, its petals just beginning to open. From the garden you like, Theron explained. I remembered what you wrote about your mother's roses. Something in Lyric's chest loosened. He had listened. He had remembered. They ate in comfortable silence, Theron telling her about the northern realm between bites. The pine forest that stretched for 100 miles. The hot springs where his pack gathered during winter. The library in his keep that held books dating back 300 years. You'd like it there, he said quietly. It's peaceful, safe. No one would hurt you. Lyric wrote on the napkin, sounds beautiful. It is, but it's also lonely. Theron set down his tea. I've been alone there for a long time, Lyric, and I'm tired of it. That afternoon, Brennan arrived with an armful of documents, ledgers, letters, land deeds, all pulled from Alpha Dorian's private study, or what remained of it after the fire. Isolde missed these, Brennan said, spreading them across the library table. They were in a false panel beneath the floorboards. Your father showed me once, said only family should know. Theron leaned over the documents, his eyes scanning quickly. Financial records, going back 5 years. Mom, look at the dates, Brennan pointed. 6 months before the fire, Isolde borrowed $200,000 from an offshore account. Reason given estate improvements. But there were no improvements, Theron said slowly. No, but there was a payment to someone named Marcus Vane 2 weeks later. Same amount. Lyric's pen flew across the paper. Who is Marcus Vane, mercenary, Cale said from the doorway. Specializes in accidents. We've had intelligence on him for years. He's suspected in at least a dozen Alpha assassinations, but no one's ever proven anything. Theron's expression went cold. She hired him to kill your parents. The room fell silent. Then Theron gathered the documents carefully, methodically. This is evidence, real concrete evidence, combined with Lyric's testimony, Emmett's medical records, and what the pack witnessed last night. He looked up, his silver eyes blazing with contained fury. We have her. Evening came with an unexpected visitor. Elder Corwin, the oldest member of the council, arrived at the East Wing with his hands raised in supplication. My king, Miss Ashford, may I speak with you? Theron's hand moved instinctively toward his blade, but Lyric touched his arm. Waited. Corwin entered slowly, looking every one of his 70 years. His hands trembled as he pulled a sealed envelope from his coat. I should have done this 3 years ago, he said, his voice cracking. I was afraid. Isolde had evidence of indiscretions. She threatened my family. But after last night, after seeing what she'd done to you, he held out the envelope to Lyric. Your father gave this to me the day before he died. Said if anything ever happened to him, I was to give it to you on your 21st birthday. I kept it hidden. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Lyric took the envelope with shaking hands. Broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper in her father's handwriting. My dearest Lyric, if you're reading this, I am gone. Know that your mother and I loved you beyond measure. The Ashford bloodline runs true in your veins. You are stronger than you know, braver than you believe. Trust the White Wolf. She will lead you home. And remember, true power isn't taken. It's earned through service, through sacrifice, through standing up when it would be easier to kneel. You are my daughter. You are an Alpha. You are a queen. Make me proud. Father tears streamed down Lyric's face as she clutched the letter. The last words her father had written. His final gift. Theron's arm came around her shoulders, solid and sure. He knew, she wrote through blurred vision. He knew something was wrong. He was trying to protect you, Theron said softly, even from beyond death. Late that night, Lyric couldn't sleep. She stood at her window watching the full moon paint silver across the grounds, feeling her wolf stir beneath her skin. Restless, wanting. 2 knocks sounded on the wall. Lyric smiled despite herself and knocked back. Once. Theron appeared in her doorway moments later, still fully dressed, his hair mussed from lying down. Can't sleep either. She shook her head. Walk with me. They moved through the silent estate like ghosts, Kale trailing at a discreet distance. Down the grand staircase. Through the portrait gallery where Lyric's ancestors watched from gilded frames. Out into the rose garden. The white roses glowed in the moonlight, their fragrance sweet and clean. My mother used to sing here, Lyric wrote, every night before bed. What did she sing? Lyric hesitated. Then for the first time in 3 years she tried. The sound that came out was barely audible. Raspy and broken and off-key. But it was sound. It was trying. It was the lullaby her mother had sung. Theron went very still. Then he took her hands in his careful and gentle. That was beautiful. It was terrible, she wrote. It was yours, he corrected, and that makes it perfect. Blue light sparked between their joined hands brighter than before. The mate bond strengthening, solidifying, becoming real. Lyric, Theron said quietly, I need you to know something. Whatever happens in that council chamber, whether they believe us, whether they don't, I'm not leaving. I'm not going back north without you. You're my mate, my queen, and I will stand beside you through whatever comes. Lyric looked up at him, at this powerful, dangerous king who had crashed into her life and somehow made her feel worthy again. She squeezed his hands. Once. Firm. Certain. I know. The morning of the council meeting arrived too quickly. Lyric stood in front of the mirror, barely recognizing herself. The pale, hollow-cheeked servant was gone. In her place stood a woman in a simple but elegant dress of deep blue, her hair pinned up with the moonstone comb, her healed hand steady. She looked like her mother. Theron appeared in the doorway. Ready? Lyric picked up her pen one last time. What if I freeze? What if I can't shift when the time comes? Then I'll handle it, he said simply. But you won't freeze. Because you're not that scared girl anymore. You're the woman who survived 3 years of hell and came out fighting. You're an alpha, Lyric. It's time to show them. She met his eyes in the mirror, nodded. Good. Then let's go remind them who really rules the Ashford pack. The council chamber was full. Every elder, every high-ranking pack member, visiting alphas from 3 territories drawn by the scandal and spectacle. And Isolde sitting in Alpha Dorian's chair wearing black silk like mourning her face, a perfect mask of wounded dignity. Only Lyric could see the black veins creeping beneath her collar, the tremor in her hands, the desperation in her eyes. The chalice was killing her. Theron entered first, Lyric on his arm, Kale and Brennan flanking them. The room fell silent. Alpha Queen Isolde, Theron said, his voice carrying to every corner. Thank you for convening this session. King Theron. Isolde's smile was poisonous. I trust you've come to apologize for your disruption of our winter ball, the trauma you caused this poor damaged girl. No, Theron guided Lyric to a seat directly across from Isolde. I've come to witness justice. He placed the stack of documents on the table. These are financial records from Alpha Dorian's private files. They show a payment of $200,000 to known mercenary Marcus Vane 2 weeks before the fire that killed the rightful Alpha and Luna. The payment originated from your accounts, Isolde. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Ridiculous, Isolde scoffed. Those could be forged. They're notarized, dated, witnessed. Theron cut her off. We also have medical testimony documenting 3 years of systematic torture inflicted on Lyric Ashford. Silver collar burns, wolfsbane poisoning, starvation. 156 deliberate cuts, all in the same location, designed to terrorize without leaving permanent visible damage. He pulled out photographs, passed them to the council elders. Their faces went white. And finally, Theron said, we have the testimony of a witness to the fire. Someone who saw the barred doors, who smelled the accelerant, who pulled the sole survivor from the flames. Brennan stepped forward. I, Brennan of the Ashford Pack, do hereby swear before the moon goddess that I witnessed lies. Isolde shrieked, slamming her hands on the table. All of it, Brennan, is compromised. The documents are fake. This is a conspiracy orchestrated by the Northern King to seize our territory. Then let's ask Lyric herself, Theron said softly. Every eye turned to the small figure in blue. Lyric stood, pulled out the paper she'd prepared, began passing them around. Her written testimony, every detail, every horror, every moment of the 3 years Isolde had stolen from her. The council read in silence. When they finished, Elder Corwin stood, his face grave. These are serious accusations. If true, they constitute regicide, false claim to alpha position, and sustained torture of a pack member. The penalty is death or permanent exile. If true, Isolde laughed, brittle and sharp, you believe a mute servant over your appointed alpha. She's damaged, broken, probably made it all up for attention. Then prove it, Theron said. Let her shift. If she's damaged as you claim, if her wolf is truly lost, she won't be able to. But if she is who I believe her to be, he looked at Lyric. Show them. Lyric stood in the center of the chamber, 200 eyes watching, Isolde's smirk, the council's skepticism, Theron's quiet confidence. She closed her eyes. Father, she thought. Mother, I'm sorry I couldn't save you, but I can honor you. She let go. The shift began with pain bones breaking, reshaping 3 years of suppression, fighting against nature. Lyric screamed, but the sound became a howl, became something wild and ancient and absolutely powerful. Light exploded from her body, violet and silver so bright the witnesses had to shield their eyes. When it faded, silence. Then gasps. Where Lyric had stood was a wolf, not just any wolf, a creature of legend thought extinct for 200 years. Pure white fur that seemed to glow from within. Massive, nearly as large as Theron's wolf form, eyes of brilliant violet. And along her shoulders and back the soul marks, silver runes that pulsed with inner light. The royal moon wolf. Isolde fell back in her chair, face white with terror. Impossible, she whispered. The white wolf turned to face her, lips pulled back from fangs that could crush bone, a growl building in her chest that made the chandelier crystals chime. Then Lyric threw her head back and howled. It wasn't just sound, it was alpha command. It was birthright and bloodline, and 3 years of silence finally breaking free. Every wolf in the chamber dropped to their knees. Not a choice. Pure instinct. Submit. Acknowledge. Obey. Even Isolde fell trembling, the black veins now visible creeping up her neck as the chalice's magic failed completely. Only Theron remained standing. He stepped forward, shifted in a blur of motion, his massive black wolf joining the white. 2 apex predators, 2 mates, 2 alphas standing side by side. The message was clear. Lyric shifted back, Theron's coat wrapped around her before she'd fully solidified. She faced the council, faced Isolde, and when she spoke, her voice was raspy but audible. I am Lyric Ashford, daughter of Alpha Dorian and Luna Seraphine, rightful alpha of this pack. The words were broken, imperfect, but they were hers, and they were heard. This council recognizes Lyric Ashford as true alpha, Elder Corwin declared, his voice shaking, and finds Isolde guilty of regicide, usurpation, and crimes against pack law. Isolde lurched to her feet, the black veins now covering half her face, her skin cracking like old porcelain. You can't. I won't. She lunged for Lyric, one last desperate attempt. Theron moved to intercept, but Lyric was faster. The white wolf erupted again, meeting Isolde mid-leap. They crashed to the marble floor in a tangle of fur and fury. It was over in seconds. Lyric's jaws closed around Isolde's throat. Not crushing, not killing, just holding. Establishing dominance, proving superiority. Isolde shifted back, aging rapidly as the chalice's stolen power died, leaving her withered and broken on the cold stone. Mercy, she rasped. Lyric released her, shifted back, looked down at the woman who had stolen 3 years of her life. You are exiled, she said, each word an effort but clear. Leave tonight, never return, or I will finish this. Guards moved forward, lifting Isolde's shaking form. As they dragged her toward the doors, she looked back one final time at the white-haired girl standing in the center of the chamber, wrapped in a king's coat, surrounded by kneeling wolves. You were supposed to stay broken, Isolde whispered. Lyric met her eyes, smiled. I was never yours to break. The door slammed shut. Brennan stepped forward, tears streaming down his weathered face. The queen is dead, he said, his voice carrying. Long live Alpha Queen Lyric. The chant rose from every throat. Long live the queen. Long live the queen. Theron shifted back, pulled on his clothes, and moved to Lyric's side. He knelt, not in submission, in partnership. My queen, he said quietly, just for her. My mate, my equal. Will you have me? Lyric's hand found his. Blue sparks dancing. Yes, she whispered. Always yes. He stood, kissed her forehead, and turned to the assembled pack. The Ashford and Northern Territories are united. 2 packs, 2 alphas, 1 crown. The chamber erupted in cheers. 6 weeks later, spring came to Ashford Estate. Lyric stood in the rose garden, the white blooms opened full and fragrant. She wore a simple dress of cream silk, her hair loose, the moonstone comb catching sunlight. Her voice had grown stronger. Not perfect, never would be, but hers. Penny for your thoughts. Theron's arms circled her waist from behind. Thinking about them, she said, touching the memorial stone they'd erected. Alpha Dorian and Luna Seraphine. Beloved, remembered, avenged. They'd be proud of you. I hope so. Theron turned her to face him, pulled a small box from his pocket. I have something for you. Inside was a ring, white gold set with a violet moonstone that matched her wolf's eyes. Lyric Ashford, Alpha Queen of the Ashford Pack, my soulmate, my partner, my equal. Marry me. Not because the bond demands it, not because politics require it, but because I love you. I choose you, every day, every moment, for the rest of our lives. Lyric looked at the ring, at the man who had saved her by believing her, at the future that was suddenly impossibly beautifully hers. Yes, she said clearly, I choose you too. He slipped the ring on her finger, kissed her as the pack cheered from the manor windows. That night, under a full moon, two wolves ran through wildflower meadows. One black as winter night, one white as new snow. Equal, matched, home. The servant girl was gone. The victim was gone. In their place stood a queen who had learned that true strength wasn't never falling down. It was getting back up.